Hi everybody, I hope that you're doing well. My name is Leah and I am the owner of Soul Revitalization Healing. I do intuitive life coaching. I help people shift out of the stuff that's holding them back, and I also help people really reach their full potential and their purpose, okay? So hello, this is a little bit impromptu again because I wanted to kind of jump on and address one of the posts that we had in our group today. So one of our group members who chose to remain anonymous asked me to share a little bit about her story. And it involved a lot about assault, a little bit of child abuse. So I'm going to give a trigger warning right now that we're going to be talking a little bit about trauma, but I'm probably not going to be talking about the specifically triggering things. I'm talking more about how to shift it. But if you're not in a space where you feel like you're healthy enough to talk about it, then just give yourself a break and come back to this another day, okay? So one of the things that I actually do specialize in whenever it comes to my career before I came into coaching was I've worked with a lot of trauma as a traditional mental health therapist. So I have a traditional mental health education. I know a lot about this kind of stuff. I've worked for rape crisis lines. I've worked at methadone clinics. I've worked with a lot of addicts in recovery who usually have a very strong history of trauma. I've worked with people in poverty. I've worked with people who are homeless. I've worked with a lot of people who've gone through shit. And I'm going to be honest, if you're watching this video, none of the people who are attracted to me or my style have not been through shit. So I can go with a safe assumption that we've all been through some serious deep shit, right? So what I'm going to be talking about a little bit today is just what I've learned to help you shift trauma. But I want to talk to you about, I'm not saying you can't do it yourself. Everyone has the power to do it yourself. We do have that power. But when it comes to like the really serious, deep stuff, it is really good to have somebody who has actually trained in trauma, who actually can get to know you, you can form a safe relationship with, and usually that's better done in real life. There's people, I went through a lot of my trauma healing myself, and a lot of people are able to do it. Mental health care isn't always accessible, so I understand why people don't go necessarily, but I do recommend if it's possible for you, if you have it in your ability, whenever it comes to this deep stuff, traditional mental health care is really good for shifting trauma. But the thing is, you have to find somebody who's trained in trauma. You have to find somebody who's specialized in trauma, because all therapists are not created equally, okay? So whenever you're looking for example, child abuse or a certain kind of sexual trauma or anything like that, it's actually really good to look for somebody who actually has a true specialty in that and kind of talk to them maybe even a little bit before you start to kind of feel their energy and get that kind of vibe. And if anybody has something that they're really looking to shift, I am more than happy if you want to send me a message to try to help look in your area and find resources. I'm talking to people all over the world, so it's not always easy. But even if it's an accessibility problem, you don't know if you can afford it, stuff like that, there actually are programs out there to help you get in touch with that. So at the very least, I can try to send you in the right direction. So that's my little preface. It's more desirable to work with someone, but there's a couple things I need to that are really important if you are going to be seeking help to work through your trauma. Is traumatized people have issues with trust and safety, right? So if our trust has been violated over and over again, if we haven't been believed, if we've been gaslighted, if we've been manipulated, if there's like a lot of emotional abuse and stuff going on in our history, it's really hard for us to get the help that we need. And this was one of my biggest frustrations with the mental health care system, because there's so much, it's so hard to build trust with somebody who's been through a lot of trauma. I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this. So if you go to a mental health care place and somebody reminds you of somebody who traumatized you, you're not going to be able to open up to them, and you're not going to be able to do any work. On top of that, because we usually have so many trust issues, it's really hard to build that trust with a clinician to really get to where you need to be to like dig deep and do the work. So one of the things I've always told my clients, because I was usually working with like a specific aspect like recovery, or I was kind of doing like the crisis counseling to help them get through the present moment. And this is something that I wish that everybody knew, because the people who need the help the most have the hardest time getting it because of money, accessibility, the way our society's set up. But there's also this thing that nobody talks about, which is trust. And if we aren't able to trust someone, if we aren't able to work with them, then we're not going to make any progress. And that's a huge problem that we have in the mental health care system. And some of the distrust of the mental health care system, especially if you're coming from a background that's more impoverished, or there's more stuff kind of in your history, you're probably going to have a hard time you're going to have a hard time connecting with someone. And if you've had a lot of people who don't believe you, or like you haven't had people listen to you or anything like that, if somebody doesn't validate your pain or really understand the seriousness or make them feel like you understand, you're probably not going to open up to them. And if they start to dig too deep, then you're probably going to just stop going. And this is a problem that I had over and over again. I think I've talked a lot about my healing journey, but I'm going to be talking about it more. And it was a problem in myself that I hadn't seen before. Not to hold anyone who's been traumatized responsible for their own healing, but there's nobody else who's going to sit down and tell you the truth of what this is and what we have to do to kind of get through it. And I think a little bit more education around how a lot of this stuff works is really helpful for that kind of thing. So that's like my little spiel in the beginning. On to the actual shifting of trauma, okay? So what I can educate you on and what I hope to build is this library where people have resources to come if they don't have the money, the access, the trust, the ability to seek help yet, is kind of like a framework of what you have to do to kind of get over trauma. And everybody's very different. So this is very, very situational, and it's why you kind of need to work with somebody individually. But I can tell you from like a clinical perspective, both as a spiritual healer and both as a traditional mental health therapist, that what we really need to do is kind of still work on the beliefs that you have built from your trauma and how you stop projecting those beliefs into other parts of your life. Hear me out. In no way am I saying this is your fault or anything like this. I'm just explaining how trauma works and how we have to shift our mindset in order to move from it, okay? And I had a really hard time because if you don't talk through the traumatic part of it and like how your brain developed these survival skills to survive, a lot of people shut down. I know that I did for a really long time. So basically, whenever we've been through a really traumatic experience, especially if it happened in childhood, the formative years, that's when we really start to develop our beliefs about how the world works. So if you're 4 years old and your parents get divorced, it doesn't matter if, and this is like a minor trauma compared to what most of us have been through, but let's just say that. It doesn't matter how many times the parents say, it's not your fault. It's our fault. You know what I mean? It's not your fault as a child. What does the child think? The child always thinks it's their fault. Always. Not always, but usually, right? Because we're at a really weird point in development where you're focused on yourself. Children are selfish, as they should be. That's how they need to develop. They need to be focused on themselves. So this is a time in their life where they feel like everything in the world around them is their fault, okay? And then think about the messaging that we give kids. And I'm not saying this messaging is bad or evil, but we have to think sometimes about the unintended consequences of different kinds of messaging that we get. Like the books, the movies, all that kind of stuff. To teach children moral development, what we teach them is the good guy always wins, the bad guy always gets punished, like good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So we're at these really formative years in our lives, and if something bad happens to you, a child's brain is going to think, something bad happened to me, I must be bad. That's a belief that we can develop from childhood trauma. So how does this affect us? And I'm not even talking about PTSD. PTSD is even a whole nother thing. I'm just even talking about like the normal complex trauma that so many of us are carrying around, and there's probably not a single person in this group that doesn't have it. So we have this belief that we developed in this really traumative time of our life, but we never sit and consciously think about that belief. It might show up in different ways though. Like we don't feel like we're good enough. We pick partners who aren't good enough for us. We seek out opportunities that aren't good enough. We work for money that like not enough money. We think we have to work harder than everyone else. Perfectionism is a way this can show up, where we think we have to be perfect, earn love. We have to earn our goodness because bad things happen to me. There must be something deep inside of me that's so bad that like bad things that the universe or God or whatever you believed in when you were a kid allow this to happen to us, because we go into the world thinking it's going to be just and fair and pure, and whenever we see that it's not, we think that we're the problem, and we don't realize that it's the world that's the problem, right? So what we really have to do for long-term healing, and this is all very big picture, again, this is not like the be-all end-all of your healing, is first of all, learn how to manage symptoms, so learning how to ground yourself whenever you have strong emotional reactions to things that kind of remind you or reminding you of past trauma that you may or may not be conscious of. So that's one thing. We're learning about emotional regulation. But then the other thing is really having to dig deep into these beliefs that you've developed about your life, because we create from those beliefs the older that we get. And it's honestly kind of bullshit. Like, that's one of the things that I think is so unfair about trauma. And as much as I am a spiritual person, I do believe we choose our life lessons and stuff like that. I don't really think it's as simple for me to sit here and say, oh, you chose that lesson, sweetie, you have to get over it. That doesn't help anyone get over it. It's not fair that people who start off with their lives with the hands of cards stacked against them have to like keep going through this over and over and over again until they resolve it. I will say a lot of our purpose does have to do with, if we did pick those lessons, probably learning how to transmute that trauma in our family line or the collective or what have you, but that's a whole nother video. So there's nothing, you don't have to blame yourself for any of this. All of this stuff kind of came from the conditioning that we've had, and we're all uprooting our conditioning that we've had, and we have to kind of start looking at things in a different way. So, but that is really the root of it. So we have to tame our emotions. So we're thinking from our logical mind and balancing our emotional state with our logical state. And we have to start reevaluating those beliefs and coming up with new beliefs to replace them. So if you believe you're not worthy, we might have to come up with a new belief that you are worthy. But I tried doing affirmations when I was in that place, and that certainly did not work for me. I know it works for some people, but you have to already kind of believe it for stuff like that to work. So we really actually have to dig deep. So how do we do that? That's the question though, because you might know this intellectually. How do we actually put that into action, right? What we have to do is we have to catch ourselves and catch our beliefs and start really analyzing our stuff. And then every time we do it, we have to replace it with a new thought. And just like repetition is probably what taught us the old beliefs that we have to use the power of repetition to keep making different choices and different thoughts and replacing our thoughts when we catch ourselves having them, without blame, without judgment, without thinking that, oh, I should be over this by now, because that's something traumatized people do too. And just starting to allow yourself to slowly start to heal and move forward. Does that make sense? So there's a lot more to it. This is very overly simplistic, but until we actually are able to sit with ourselves and quiet our minds, and until we're able to start to really quiet our emotions and start to analyze ourselves and see ourselves clearly, we're not going to be able to figure out those beliefs and those thoughts, and we're not going to be able to replace them with something new. So if you don't have resources to work on anything, I do highly recommend contacting me if you need them, because I will help you find them. I'd be more than happy to help you find them. But if you can't, mindfulness is a really good tool for that. I'm going to be having a mindfulness course, but this isn't even really to push the mindfulness course. It's just because that came up in the group today, and I think that this is valuable information for everyone. So just some things to think about whenever it comes to shifting trauma. And also just realizing that the belief that we're changing isn't that like what should have happened, like what happened should have happened. Like we can have acceptance that it happened without thinking that it's fair. We can have acceptance that that it happened without thinking that it's right. Just allowing yourself to accept that it did happen and move on so that you can kind of have a better life on top of it after everything happened. I hope that makes sense. If anybody has questions or that wasn't clear, please comment below, because I'd love to expand on this more in a way that is useful for you. And sometimes because I've been in this world for so long, I might skip over parts. But basically, the gist of this is really figuring out how we're carrying this stuff in our life. And there's also an energy component. That's part of why I combine all these things and do energy healing, and also do a lot of mindset work, and also kind of, it's not counseling. I don't do therapy outside of it because that wouldn't be ethical, but like just kind of working with it. But I really, whenever it comes to like the deep trauma stuff, it's kind of better to go towards the life coaches more when you've kind of worked through it with a professional first. I hope that makes sense. I've had a lot of problems with Western medicine, and I will continue to talk about them because there needs to be a lot of change. But there's also a lot of good resources out there too. So we kind of have to figure out how to find the right practitioners to trust, and we have to figure out also what we're bringing to the table and how we can be more open to healing too. Because trauma, unfortunately, makes us kind of like shut down to even trusting people enough to let them help us heal. And a lot of us don't even realize that we're carrying those beliefs around. So I hope that helps. Like I said, if you have any more questions, or if you want me to talk about something more, please leave it in the comments and we'll talk about it. I'm more than happy to talk about it more if you want to talk to me privately about finding resources to help you through some of the things you have. I will, however, tell you, you are not destined to a life of pain because you've had trauma before. One of the things that I refuse to believe, and I can say honestly I was able to shift, was that I had to spend the rest of my life living in this traumatized fight or flight state. And that's another thing we can work on getting you out of too. But I'll take, it's been long enough. I'll put it on another video. I couldn't stand somebody watching for 20 minutes, so it's probably about that. All right, so I love you guys very much. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, let me know. And just remember, we are gonna get through this. Things are gonna be better. We're gonna create a better world. And right now, so many of us are shifting this trauma, and we're being guided to, and as hard as it is, and as much as it sucks, we are actually going to create something better out of that. Does that make sense? So have a lot of faith in that, guys, because like I talked about trauma on like a small level, like on an individual level, we have to uncover those beliefs and what we were doing that kind of self-sabotages our life as we move forward. We're doing the same thing on a collective level. There's so much collective trauma because we've built systems that are so bad for people. There's a reckoning right now where we're having to like look at all the shit that we created. It wasn't good, but that's okay. The good of it is that we see it now and we can create something new. There's hope in this. There's hope for change. For once in my life, I actually feel like there's hope, and that is really exciting. And as long as we keep healing on an individual level, that is going to shine through to the collective, and we are going to make such a big difference. So have faith in that. Okay. All right. Sorry, I know I talked really fast. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good day. Love you guys. Bye.